This on-air production is based on the book From Cinderella to CEO, How to Master the 10 Lessons of Fairy Tales to Transform Your Work Life.
Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?
Well, I don't think I'm the fairest of them all, but I am host of Cinderella CEO on Air. My name is Cary Broussard, and I'm delighted you've joined us today. We are coming to you from Chicago. The Windy City is the host to the Conscious Capitalism National Conference, and our guest is Brian Robertson. He's the author of Holacracy, the new management system for a rapidly changing world. This system distributes authority and decision-making throughout an organization. And Brian's even developed a constitution, if you will, that contains a new glossary of business terms. It's a real game changer. I think you will enjoy getting to know him as I have. How did Zappos become interested in Holacracy?
Yeah, Tony looking for that approach to scale this company, right? It's a tremendously successful company, wonderful culture, really incredible company. And he wanted to not lose that as they scaled. In fact, he wanted to enhance it. He wanted to be able to scale without the bureaucracy, with more entrepreneurial creativity to allow more people to use their gifts, their talents, their creativity in that company. And he knew the typical corporate mold would not do that beyond a point as you grow. And so he was looking for other approaches. And he was looking for something more like a city, right? Where you look at a city and you don't have bosses directing all the action. You have people that have their own purpose and are kind of free within a framework to figure out how to express that purpose and live their lives. So for them and for Tony, it was wanting something like that for his company, for Zappos. And
that's interesting, too, because just to stop you on that point, too, elected officials are part of cities. So in a way, this is also people electing their leaders.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very different from everything we've seen before, typically Holacracy. Like, we're not actually electing leaders per se. It's more like what we experience in society outside of any governmental process or anything like that, which is most of our life in society. When I don't, vote on everything with my neighbors, I simply know, here's my piece to lead, and I can count on my neighbors for some things when we have agreements, and I know not to take his car because that's his property, right? There's boundaries. And I think healthy relationships are like that too. It's about knowing the boundaries, knowing, where you stop and someone else starts. And yet then we go into companies, and if a typical company were a family, we use that metaphor a lot, they are codependent messes, right? They are everybody not knowing what's theirs to lead and what anyone else's is, and trying to kind of push everyone else to see things their way. And
that's interesting too. So you're saying that the family model too can be very dysfunctional. I'm not saying putting words in your mouth. I tend to agree.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, you hear, I want my company to be like a family often, and I said that too when I built my companies. But do we really want that? Like, look at our typical families. There's a lot of kind of codependent, dysfunctional mess in a lot of families. And
that is so funny.
Yeah, I want a healthy family dynamic, the kind that we get to be adults together. And I think in most of our families, we see most of our companies, we see a very parent-child dynamic between leadership, managers, and employees. And the system kind of sets that up. You have to look to the manager to save you and empower you. And well, if you need someone else to empower you, then you're in a system that fundamentally kind of makes you a victim.
How do gender issues come into play on this? So I'm really intrigued of what your answer will be about this.
Yeah, I'm always hesitant as a male to make too many statements about that.
I just thought I'd corner him, listeners. No, I think it'll be very interesting.
One thing I'll mention, one of the employees at Zappos, a woman in Zappos, wrote a really cool blog post about how Holacracy for her had helped her move past some of the gender's bias that she had experienced. And kind of created more of an even ground for her style of leadership. And another colleague made the point that look at the top-down management hierarchy, the era that matured in, just societally. Even if we know nothing else about it, it matured and grew up. It was created in a completely male-dominant culture, right? The era, about 100 years ago, completely male-dominant culture. Stands to reason that something about that model, even if we don't put a finger on what, is probably biased. Right? Where Holacracy matured in a much more egalitarian cultural era today. So, it's even just that difference of the era that it came about in and the cultural ethic that was kind of embedded in it was different. And then I think you can dig in deeper too and see the specific processes, the way it allows leadership to be distributed and to happen, the way it gives everyone a voice, it kind of ends the kind of patriarchal just drive forward leadership as the only way to show up and add value or to climb the management ranks or whatever. And it's really it's much more entrepreneurial. It's much more, anyone can add value by being creative and by connecting with others and creating together. And so,
is it also outcome driven?
I'd say it's more that when you distribute real autonomy, real authority, and it's purpose-driven, right? So, and I make a distinction that does lead to outcome, of course, but it's deeper than outcome. It's distributed purpose. So any company with a overarching purpose is great, but to make that real, you've got to break it down. You need to know what piece of the company, what's your purpose and your role. And by the way, you probably have at least a dozen roles in your company. Most people do. So what are the purposes you're serving of each, and how do they kind of roll up? From the purpose, you can figure out what are the right outcomes and use your creativity. If all you have is, here are the outcomes you're working towards, you actually don't have the opportunity to be really deeply creative and entrepreneurial. Purpose enables that.
So what does that do for human resources, job descriptions, all the tools that, support a company?
Yeah. Well, to get a little more concrete, so think of the typical way a job description is created. It's usually somebody who's not the one doing the work, writing them based on their theoretical idea of what they think, the right organizational structure is. And then they're out of date by the time they roll off the printer. No one uses them. They're kind of silly, really. They're an artifact. In contrast, what Holacracy does is embeds a governance process in every team. So every team is having a regular governance meeting where they're updating in real time the actual written descriptions of what are we going to count on each other for, and what are the purposes that we're each going to serve, right? And what are the activities we can expect from each other, the authorities that go with them, all that. So rather than job descriptions coming from outside the team and somebody's kind of big idea up front, they're a living, breathing, dynamic creation that are the result of you and I working together, realizing something's in the way of us getting work done and expressing our purpose together. And then we go into this governance meeting and we sort it out and we figure out, how do we need to tweak the actual written expectations? And when you do that, the actual written expectations are not abstract and from on high. They're a living, breathing output that's just capturing a snapshot of our best understanding collectively of what we need to serve together and what we need to count on each other for.
That is great. So it's almost a fluid document as well, even if it's a document.
Yeah, it is. And it's usually software supported. There's a software tool called Glassfrog that supports that and captures that and lets them be living, breathing. And it's really cool. It's a totally different way of viewing organization. And you can even see the org chart in that looks much more like almost an organic biological thing. It's cells within organs, within systems, within humans, right? Like that's our organization in our body. And that's very much what Holacracy does. It's roles within broader circles, within circles, within circles. So it's a very kind of nested organic org chart. And then if you drill down into those deepest cells, which are the roles we fill, you see this constant flux of our learning of what's this role really need? What does it need to do? What does it need to focus on? And that's a living, breathing process. And it's tapping kind of our collective wisdom to create it. So it's by doing work together that we realize we learn. We say something needs to change in the way we're working together. And in most companies, we have nowhere to go. We can't do anything with that. So our consciousness is wasted, right? We have these senses of how to improve things and nothing to do. And with Holacracy, you have this living process, this governance process that you're going to regularly, and you're dynamically reorganizing at a micro level in every team all the time.
What is your Twitter handle, Brian?
Yeah, I'm at @H1 Brian, Brian, and you can also connect with @Holacracy1, which is our organization.
Fantastic. Okay, the question I have for you, I'm going to ask two. One, is your background biology? I'm just curious what your background is. And two, who are your mentors?
Yeah, no, my background is not biology, although I'm a closet, I'm interested in pretty much everything.
I can tell.
I am a dropout, so I have no educational background. I've dropped out of every school I've ever been in.
That's really, tell me a little bit about that. Why did you drop out of school?
Yeah, those systems just didn't work for me. I from a very young age, my background's in software, and I started software development. Actually, I learned to read on programming books. I was very young.
Isn't that most people learn on comic books maybe or Sesame Street, but you learned on manuals how to maybe do technology?
I software development coding from a very young age, and it was a creative outlet. It was for me an art. It was a way to create, and then I went into this school system that seemed to crush the creativity out of me and left me no room to really truly learn, which is what I was passionate about. Instead, it was knowledge forced into me and a very authoritarian structure, and it just didn't work. And I wanted the creativity to explore and learn and develop and grow. And so I left that system. I opted out very young.
Do you think people can learn at any age?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I mean, learning starts, before we're born. I think we're always engaging with our world. And I think the learning process, we sometimes mistake it as a process of instilling knowledge in someone, but it's really a engagement with the environment. It's doing something and then seeing the feedback from what we do. And it's no different in organizations today. I mean, it's doing stuff. That's the root of learning. It's not our theories and our strategies and our strategic planning and our executive retreats. The root of learning in organization is on the ground doing, enacting something, and then getting the feedback of how did that work?
And so many of us learn that way. I mean, really, we think we have ADD. We think we have whatever, some doctor told us was our learning problem or disability. Perhaps it's the system.
Yeah, I think all true learning, everyone learns that way. And there's a role for knowledge too. But today, knowledge, you can Google that. You don't need that. What you need is that experiential engage and adapt, the feedback loops. And that's as true for adults in our organization. It's as true for the company itself. If we want to have stellar companies, purpose-driven, inspiring companies, we need companies that can learn. And to get companies that can learn, we need everyone in that organization who senses anything that could be better to have something to do with it to improve the company.
I love that. And I guess the question I asked earlier, who were, is that correct English? I think so. Who are your mentors? Who may be your mentors in the future? But what's your vision for the future?
Yeah, well, so mentors, I a lot of different influences, but the guy that wrote the foreword to my book is David Allen, who's the author of Getting Things Done or the GTD Method. He's a pretty popular author, and I had read his work, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, something like that. And it was life-changing for me. It was a more conscious approach to engaging with my world, and it allowed me to not be overwhelmed all the time by the massive complexity of being a CEO. And I learned so much from him. And his company now has adopted Holacracy, which is kind of a really cool connecting to the story of me getting to then give something back to somebody that's done so much for me. And then he wrote the foreword to my book, which was really generous.
Congratulations on your book.
Thank you. Yeah, and there would be no book to write if it weren't for all of the brave leaders that are jumping into a new way of organizing. So I think credit really ultimately goes to them, the early adopters of this method, and the pioneers that are actually looking for what would organization be like if we didn't assume that management hierarchy was the only way to lead and break things down.
So in terms of the first step that our listeners can take, one, we'd love for them to buy the book, but eventually they will buy the book, I'm sure. But what would be the first step that you'd recommend someone who wanted to take a step towards Holacracy?
Yeah, so one thing is just learn more, right? Absorb more. Our website, holacracy.org, there's free webinars we have on there, videos that just kind of give you a sense of what this thing's all about. Of course, the book does that. From there, what most companies do is kind of a next step. Some will go to our workshops. We have public workshops that give you an experiential taste of it. But what most companies do is take their executive team and do a retreat. We do a 2-day workshop where we you bring your real issues and we bring Holacracy's processes to them. So you get to experience over 2 days, what does this actually feel like? And how does it compare to what we would normally have done with those real issues that are in our business right now? And then we also craft what would this look like at your company and kind of a rollout plan. And that's a really nice first step. And at the worst case, you leave those 2 days and you spent some time working on your real issues. And maybe you've picked up some tips from this new process that you can use tomorrow. And best case, you find a new system that actually really deeply works for your company.
And has Holacracy been in existence long enough to have metrics to show that this has a better outcome or is better for the the community? What are some of the metrics?
Yeah, I do hear from our clients anecdotal metrics every now and then, but I actually don't pay much mind to them. And the reason for me is there are so many things that affect performance. So, I could tell you, yeah, company X adopted Holacracy, and then they tripled in size. And there's graphs online, actually, and some blog posts that somebody wrote about that. And that's great, but how do we know that was from Holacracy, or anything else they're doing? And especially the companies that do this are already pretty great, inspiring companies usually. So for me, the real metric, if you will, is not in the hard numbers, which can have so many influences. It's in the gut feel of the CEOs and executives that do this, and going to them after they've been doing this for a little while and saying, your experience, how is your experience different? Do you feel like you have more capacity to have your organization express its purpose in the world? Do your issues get resolved quicker with more clarity? And then the people on the front line too, do you feel like you have more capacity to help this organization learn and to lead your work, lead your roles, right? To me, it's those data points, which you can't really roll up into a number, or maybe you can, and I just don't know how to do it. I'm not a statistics guy at all, but it's that experiential difference that really is the heart of this work to me.
And it is interesting because it's a more full person. It's a more engaged person. What will that do will that just freak out the CFO? What's happening with chief financial officers? And then I would have loved to have ended the interview there because I thought you articulated it so well. But what came to my mind is, okay, CFOs seem to really be running most big companies because it is the metrics of bigger, more money, even retention, all the things that save money. So have you heard from CFOs?
Yes, many do have an interesting struggle when Holacracy comes in. Every now and then you'll find an inspiring one that has really outgrown the myopic focus of that role and looking at that as really just money is a great tool. It's I like John Mackey's comment. It's like blood. You need it, but it's not the purpose of life. But the shift is there, and it's not just CFOs. It's a lot of people that have grown up and they have learned to master the game of how to be a good leader that drives profits or whatever in their business. And this is shifting it, and it's forcing a more purpose-driven stance. Holacracy is ruthlessly purpose-driven, right? And all the rest is an interesting outcome of that. The financial performance, everything, a great metric, love profit, wonderful metric, useful tool, but it's not the purpose of a business. And when you focus on that, you actually hinder, ironically, the very thing you're seeking. When you focus at a broader level, when you focus at the purpose level, and when you focus internally on how can people actually contribute their best, well, all that gets harnessed into making a company that's more effectively able to generate value for customers, which translates to profit, right?
Got it.
Now, broader focus. Yeah.
I really, really appreciate your time. And Brian and I met at the National Conference for Conscious Capitalism. There is this openness here around conscious capitalism for new ideas, new thinking. Of course, we have very profitable companies here. If you were to give some advice to our listeners, even if it has nothing to do with Holacracy, but it sounds like it probably will. But if you had to give us just one or two pieces of advice as we're listening to you, where most of us are working or building our businesses in some way, working for someone else or building our businesses, what would you give us advice-wise?
Yeah, especially for business leaders, having been there, it's an overwhelming space, and I would wake up in the middle of the night, sweaty, worried. So much was in my charge. So many people depended on me. The pressure to be a heroic leader and almost superhuman is so high. And to some extent, what I realized was I can never possibly live up to that. I can't be that superhero all the time, every day, day in and day out, no matter how hard I try. But what I can do is create an environment and in every way I can, culture, process, whatever, create an environment where everyone also wakes up at night sweating, worried, because we're all sharing the burden of leadership. We're all parenting this organization together instead of me parenting a bunch of employees, right? And if you can shift your environment and your culture to one where it's truly leaderful, where everybody is showing up and leading and everyone is taking that overall responsibility for everything. If you can build that environment, you still might wake up in the middle of the night, but at least you know that you're part of a team and others are as well. And it's okay to have a bad day because someone else is having a good day. Build that company.
Wow, what a great way to end the interview. But I hope the conversation will stay in motion between us and with our listeners. So keep us posted. We'll connect on CinderellaCEO.com and in other ways in person. We'll follow you as you go around the country and the world speaking on holacracy. So just like democracy, we'll see holacracy written in the history books. So thank you so much, Brian.
Yeah, thank you, Cary.